Want her instead, the farrier's daughter over mine? The words cracked through the front room like a rifle shot. Every soul in the parlor turned toward Colton Sharpe as he stood next to Bridget Tierney. Not the golden-haired Phoebe everyone had spent 6 weeks grooming for this moment. Not the daughter who could play violin and recite Shakespeare and curtsy without wobbling. The other one. The one with rope burns on her palms and hay stuck in her braid. The one who smelled like horse liniment and January wind. Hugh Tierney's face went the color of raw beef. Phoebe's rehearsed smile collapsed, and Bridget stood perfectly still, waiting for Colton to laugh, to correct himself, to reveal the terrible joke. He didn't. Before we ride deeper into the storm, hit that like button and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I want to see how far Bridget's story reaches. Now, let's go. The January cold in the Alberta foothills didn't creep. It attacked. Bridget Tierney hauled a bale of Timothy hay across the yard toward the horse barn, her breath freezing in white clouds that vanished before they cleared her shoulders. She'd been working since 4:30, breaking ice off the water troughs, mucking stalls, checking on the pregnant mare who'd been colicky for 2 days. Her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves an hour ago, but numb fingers still worked. That was the arrangement. Bridget worked. Phoebe shone. Nobody had ever written it down, but the whole Tierney household understood it the way they understood gravity. Bridget! Her father's voice carried from the house, sharp enough to cut through wind. Get inside and clean yourself up. The Sharpe family arrives at 6. She didn't answer. Answering cost breath she needed for hauling. She kicked the barn door open, dropped the bale, and pulled off her gloves to check the mare one more time. The animal's flanks had settled. Good. One less problem. Inside the house, the performance was already underway. Phoebe stood in front of the hallway mirror, turning slowly, while their mother, Maeve Tierney, adjusted a burgundy dress that must have cost more than the family spent on feed in a month. Phoebe's blonde hair caught lamplight like something from a painting. Her posture was flawless. Her expression a calculated blend of warmth and reserve. Bridget passed through without stopping. Wash your face at least, Maeve said. And put on something decent. Phoebe can't be the only daughter they see tonight. They're here to see Phoebe, Bridget said, not the stable help. Don't start. Bridget went upstairs. The hot water in the basin was lukewarm, the leftover from Phoebe's preparations. She scrubbed her hands until the grime under her nails faded from black to gray, which was as good as it got. Her face in the mirror looked older than 27. Sun-darkened skin, brown hair yanked back in a braid that had given up being neat around noon, and gray-green eyes that expected nothing from tonight except more invisible labor. Colton Sharpe was coming to choose a bride. The whole valley knew it. The arrangement had been negotiated in careful letters between Hugh Tierney and Colton's father, Warren Sharpe, over 3 months of diplomatic correspondence that treated daughters like livestock at auction. The Tierney ranch was drowning. Debts on top of debts. A boundary dispute with the Brennan family over grazing rights along Willow Creek had been bleeding them in legal fees for years. Meanwhile, the Sharpe Ranch was the largest operation between Calgary and the Crow's Nest Pass, thousands of acres, contracts with the railway, connections to territorial politicians in Edmonton. But even empires needed alliances, and Warren Sharpe had decided that a marriage would bind the Tierney property to his holdings more permanently than any contract, so Colton was coming to inspect the merchandise. Bridget pulled on a clean cotton shirt, gray, and her work trousers. Her mother would be furious. Her father would be furious. Her father would probably send her back upstairs. But Bridget was tired of pretending to be something other than exactly what she was. If she had to stand in that parlor and watch her younger sister get sold like a broodmare, she'd do it honestly. The voices downstairs shifted. Deeper now, male. Bridget came down the stairs slowly, not from nerves but because she wanted to see him before he saw her. Colton Sharpe stood in the center of the parlor like he'd been planted there. Tall, dark-haired, broad across the shoulders in a way that came from throwing hay, not lifting weights. He wore a suit that didn't fit him right. Too tight across the chest, sleeves a touch short. His face was hard to read. Polite smile, but his eyes didn't match it. Beside him stood Warren Sharpe, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who could calculate the dollar value of everything in a room without moving his head. and beside Warren stood Hugh Tierney, wearing his best coat and his best impression of a man who hadn't mortgaged his daughter's futures to cover his gambling debts. "Phoebe, come meet Mr. Colton Sharpe." Hugh's voice dripped with manufactured pride. Phoebe glided forward, every motion rehearsed, every angle calculated. The burgundy dress moved like water. Her smile was warm without being eager. She extended her hand, and Colton took it, bowing slightly. "Miss Tierney, your father speaks very highly of you." "I hope not too highly," Phoebe said with a practiced laugh. "I'd hate to set expectations I can't meet." Bridget watched from the staircase, forgotten. This was the transaction. Phoebe would charm, Hugh would negotiate, and eventually the Sharpe men would leave with an agreement that saved the Tierney ranch in exchange for one beautiful daughter. Then Colton's gaze lifted past Phoebe and found Bridget standing on the stairs in her work clothes and mud-caked boots. Something shifted in his expression. Not attraction. Something more like recognition. The way you might notice a wolf in a field of sheep, and this is. Colton's question hung unfinished. Hugh turned, saw Bridget, and his jaw went rigid. "My older daughter Bridget, she was just checking on the colicky mare," Bridget finished, coming down the last steps. "She's settled now, should be fine by morning." Silence. Maeve looked mortified. Phoebe's smile held, but her eyes went cold. Warren Sharpe's expression said he'd found mud on his dinner plate. But Colton was still looking at Bridget with that searching expression. "Colicky mare," he repeated. "What did you treat her with?" "Warm mash with a bit of mineral oil. Walked her for an hour until the gut sounds came back." "Good call. Most people reach for the laudanum too fast. Laudanum masks the problem, doesn't fix it." Hugh stepped in, spinning damage control. "Bridget helps around the property. She's very capable with the animals. But please, Mr. Sharpe, let's sit down." The evening ran according to script. Phoebe sat beside Colton answering questions about her education, her musical abilities, her knowledge of French literature. She was perfect, a flawless performance that Bridget could have predicted word for word. Warren steered conversation toward business while maintaining the fiction that this was social. Hugh agreed with everything, laughed at every joke, sold his daughter with the desperate charm of a man watching his world collapse. Bridget served tea, cleared plates, existed only when usefulness required it. But every time she moved through the room, she felt Colton watching her, not the way men watched when they wanted something, more like he was trying to solve a problem that didn't match the equation he'd been given. At 9 o'clock, Warren stood. "Well, Hugh, productive evening. Colton, we should head back." "Of course." Colton rose, but his attention stayed on Bridget as she collected cups. "Miss Bridget, you mentioned the mare. Do you handle all the veterinary work here?" The question came from nowhere. Everyone froze. "Someone has to," Bridget said. "The nearest vet is in Pincher Creek, 2 hours each way. I've got a stallion at our place that's been favoring his left foreleg for weeks. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with him. Would you be willing to take a look?" Hugh's smile turned painful. "I'm sure Phoebe would be delighted to. I'd like Miss Bridget to come," Colton said, polite but immovable. "If she's diagnosing colic by gut sounds alone, she knows more about horses than anyone on my payroll." Warren's expression darkened. "Colton, we discussed a consultation about the stallion." Colton finished. "Makes sense to ask the person with the expertise. Tomorrow morning, if that works." Hugh agreed through clenched teeth. The Sharpe men left, and the moment the door closed, the parlor detonated. What the hell was that? Hugh's face had gone crimson. "He's supposed to be courting Phoebe." "He was just being polite," Maeve said quickly. "Asking about the horse. Nothing more." "He looked at her," Phoebe said quietly, and for the first time Bridget heard something genuine beneath her sister's composure. Something hurt and bewildered. The entire evening he kept looking at her, because she came downstairs dressed like a ranch hand. Hugh turned on Bridget. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that someone had to treat the mare, and I wasn't going to let her suffer so I could put on a dress nobody would notice anyway." "You'll fix this tomorrow." Take him to see the horse, talk up Phoebe the entire time, and make it clear where his attention belongs. Understood? Bridget nodded. There was no point in arguing. That night she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind howl off the Rockies and tried to make sense of it. Maybe Colton felt sorry for her. Maybe he genuinely needed help with his horse and didn't care who provided it. Or maybe a small, dangerous voice whispered he'd seen something worth seeing. Bridget killed that thought immediately. That kind of hope was a trap she'd learned to avoid years ago. Morning came sharp and clear. Bridget had been working since before dawn. By the time Colton arrived at 10, riding alone on the big black gelding, she'd already put in half a day. He came without his father. No chaperone, no entourage, just Colton Sharpe in practical riding clothes that looked far more natural than last night's suit. They rode in near silence for 20 minutes toward the Sharpe property. Bridget kept conversation factual, pointing out terrain features, creek crossings, the boundary markers between Tierney and Brennan land. Colton listened without interrupting. Finally, as they crested a hill overlooking the valley with the Rocky Mountains stacking white against the western sky, he spoke. "You do all of this yourself?" "Most of it. We've got one hired hand, Mac. He's 63 and his knees are gone. I do the rest." "Your father?" "Manages finances." Bridget let the word carry the weight it deserved. "And Phoebe handles social obligations. And you handle everything else." "Someone has to." They reached the Sharpe ranch by noon. The scale of it stole Bridget's breath. Barns like cathedrals, corrals stretching to the horizon, hands moving between buildings with the discipline of a military operation. This wasn't a ranch. This was a kingdom. Colton led her to a stall where a tall chestnut stallion stood favoring his left foreleg. Bridget spent 40 minutes examining the animal, running her hands along tendons, checking hooves, watching how he shifted weight. The ranch hands gathered to watch, skeptical. The foreman, a weathered man named Mac Lindenno, relation to her, Mac crossed his arms and waited. "It's not the leg," Bridget said finally. "It's his shoulder. Feel here." She guided Colton's hand to a spot below the stallion's withers. "There's a knot in the muscle, probably from a bad roll or a fall months ago. He's compensating by shifting weight off that side, which makes the leg look lame. Treatment? Warm compresses twice a day and massage. He'll be sound inside 3 weeks." Mac Linden's eyebrows climbed toward his hat. "I'll be damned." On the ride back, Colton said, "Last night when I looked around your parlor, you know what I saw? A stage. Everyone performing. Your father playing the struggling landowner. My father playing the calculating empire builder. Your sister playing the perfect bride. Even my own part the dutiful son making a strategic match." "That's how these arrangements work," Bridget said. "I've been through a dozen of them. Met a dozen perfect daughters. Every single one felt the same. Hollow. Rehearsed." He looked at her. "Then you came down those stairs smelling like horse liniment, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw something real." Bridget couldn't breathe properly. "Mr. Sharpe, you should know my father ordered me to spend today selling you on Phoebe's virtues." "Did he now?" "Yes. So let me be clear. Phoebe is kind, talented, well-educated. She'll host your dinners, manage your household, and never embarrass you in front of important people. She's everything I'm not." "And what are you?" "I'm the daughter who makes sure the animals don't die. That's all. I don't believe that. Believe what you want. But I know how this story goes." Colton smiled, not the polite smile from last night, but something reckless and genuine. "What if I don't want that story?" "Then you're a fool." That evening, everything went wrong. The Sharpe men returned for dinner. The table glittered with borrowed silver. Phoebe wore sapphire blue. Bridget had been told to eat in the kitchen. She was halfway through a cold plate when her father appeared in the doorway, face white. "Parlor, now." The air in the parlor had turned to glass. Maeve sat rigid. Phoebe stood by the window with her back to the room. Warren looked like he'd been poisoned. "Tell her," Hugh said, voice strangled. Colton turned to Bridget. "I've told both our fathers that if this alliance proceeds, you're the one I intend to marry. Not Phoebe, you." The floor vanished beneath Bridget's feet. "You want her instead?" Hugh's voice climbed toward something unhinged. The farrier's daughter over mine. Phoebe is your daughter too, Bridget heard herself say. Which wasn't the point, and she knew it. I'm choosing the woman who actually keeps this ranch alive, Colton said calmly. The woman who diagnosed a shoulder injury that 3 veteranians missed. I need a partner, Mr. Tierney, not a centerpiece. This is madness, Warren said. Colton, we discussed. You discussed. You discussed. I'm deciding. Phoebe turned from the window. Her face was composed, but the devastation underneath was visible to anyone who knew where to look. It's fine, she said quietly. If that's what Mr. Sharpe wants. Refuse him, Hugh commanded Bridget. Tell him the arrangement is for Phoebe. And the old Bridget would have done it. The Bridget who believed she existed only to keep things running for everyone else. But something had cracked open today. On that hilltop, looking at the mountains, being seen for the first time in her life. No, Bridget said. If Mr. Sharpe wants to marry me, I accept. You ungrateful. Hugh took a step forward, and Maeve's voice cut through like a blade. Hugh, stop. Everyone turned. Maeve stood slowly, her face unreadable. She's right. We've used her shamefully. I've used her shamefully. She looked at Bridget with something that might have been regret. If Mr. Sharpe sees value in you, perhaps we should have looked harder. Get out, Hugh said, shaking. Both of you, get out of my house. They rode into the January night together, Bridget on a borrowed horse because even her own mare technically belonged to her father. The cold was savage, but she barely felt it. Behind them, she heard Phoebe crying softly, and Maeve's voice trying to hold things together. The Sharpe ranch appeared under moonlight like a small city. Warren was waiting on the porch, whiskey in hand. So you actually brought her? I did. Warren looked Bridget up and down. You realize this destroys the alliance. Hugh Tierney won't honor any agreement now. Then we'll build a different one, Colton said. Warren's housekeeper, a Métis woman named Delphine, showed Bridget to a guest room larger than her entire bedroom back home. Before leaving, Delphine paused. For what it's worth, the young Mr. P. Sharpe made a good choice. We could use someone real around here. Bridget sat on the edge of a bed she didn't belong in and stared at the ceiling. What had she done? The next weeks were war. Warren opposed her at every turn, speaking over her at dinner, introducing her to visitors as Colton's project, dismissing every suggestion she made about ranch operations. Bridget absorbed it because fighting openly would only prove his point. But she worked. She rode fence lines with Mac Linden and the hands. She treated sick animals, repaired tack, demonstrated a knowledge of livestock that most of the crew couldn't match. By the second week, men were asking her opinion. By the third, Mac was assigning her real responsibilities. Then the cattle went missing. 40 head vanished from the South Range overnight. Trail led straight toward Brennan property. Colton gathered 6 armed men and prepared to ride across the boundary to take them back. Bridget intercepted him at the gate. Let me ride ahead alone. Absolutely not. They won't shoot an unarmed woman approaching openly. If I can get them talking, we might get the cattle back without anyone dying. And if they shoot you, then you'll have excellent grounds for that fight you're itching for. But let me try first. She rode into Brennan territory alone, heart slamming against her ribs. Dale Brennan met her with 2 riders, rifles across their saddles. State your business. 40 head of Sharpe cattle were driven onto your land last night. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm asking for a conversation before this becomes something nobody can undo. Dale studied her. You're the one Colton Sharpe chose over the pretty sister. That's me. Heard you've got rough hands. I do. Also heard Warren Sharpe can't stand you. Also, accurate. Dale was quiet for a long moment. Then, follow me, but your husband's men stay where they are. Inside, over coffee, they pieced it together. Someone had driven the cattle onto Brennan land, deliberately. Someone who wanted both families shooting at each other so they could swoop in and buy the wreckage cheap. The real enemy wasn't across the fence. It was behind them both. We find them together, Bridget said. Share information. Figure out who profits from us killing each other. Dale extended his hand. Deal. 2 hours later, the stolen cattle crossed back to Sharpland under the watch of both crews. No shots fired. No blood spilled. Warren was waiting when they returned. He'd heard everything from a Brennan rider who'd galloped ahead. "Come with me," he said. "Both of you." In his study, Warren poured himself a whiskey and didn't offer them any. "Dale Brennan just sent word. Wants to meet next week to renegotiate the grazing dispute. He specifically requested you be present." He looked at Bridget. "Apparently you impressed him. I talked instead of shooting. It's not complicated. I still think you're unsuitable. I still think Colton made a mistake." Warren set down his glass. "But you just prevented a range war that would have cost me men and any chance at resolving this dispute. So I'm willing to tolerate you, for now." It wasn't warmth. It wasn't even close. But it was a crack. The investor dinner came 2 weeks later. 3 men from Toronto, 2 from Winnipeg, all representing railway money, looking to expand into Alberta cattle operations. Bridget wore a deep green dress Delphine had altered from something that had belonged to Colton's mother, Laurel Sharpe, who had died of pneumonia when Colton was 14. Warren guided conversation toward expansion plans, profit projections, aggressive growth. When one of the Toronto investors, a man named Kirkpatrick, turned to Bridget and asked what she thought of Warren's plan to double the herd in 3 years. The table went silent. Bridget looked at Warren, who stared back with cold warning. Then she looked at Colton, who nodded. "I think it's dangerous," she said. "Doubling a herd requires doubling grazing capacity, water access, and winter feed. This land can't support it. My father made the same mistake, expanded too fast, borrowed too heavily, assumed prices would stay high. When they dropped, he couldn't adapt. Now he's losing everything." Warren's face went carefully blank. "So what would you recommend?" Kirkpatrick asked. "Strategic growth. Sustainable increases based on actual carrying capacity. Ambition is valuable. Recklessness will destroy you." For a moment the room held its breath, and Kirkpatrick laughed. "She's right, Warren. We've watched a dozen operations collapse from overexpansion. This is the most practical analysis we've heard all week. After the investors left, having committed to fund the ranch at a more moderate scale, Warren cornered Bridget in the hall. "You undermined me. I told them the truth. They were testing your judgment. If I'd sat there nodding along with an unsustainable plan, they would have walked away." "I didn't embarrass you," Bridget said. "I saved you." She walked away before he could respond. 3 months later, Phoebe arrived at the Sharpe ranch in the middle of the night. Half-starved, shaking, riding a horse she'd taken from their father's barn. Hugh had arranged her marriage to Rupert Harlan, a 61-year-old banker in Medicine Hat, who'd already buried 2 wives. He paid Hugh $800 for the privilege. "I'm not for sale anymore," Phoebe said, standing in the doorway of the guest cottage, looking like a stranger in her own skin. "I can't marry him, Bridget. I can't." Part of Bridget wanted to turn away. Phoebe had stood silent while their father raged, had benefited from a system that treated Bridget as invisible. But a larger part remembered what it felt like to have no choices and nowhere to go. "Come inside," Bridget said. "We'll figure it out." Warren fought it. Colton overruled him. Hugh Tierney arrived 4 days later, demanding his daughter back, threatening lawyers, threatening ruin. When he raised his hand toward Bridget, Colton caught his wrist mid-swing. "Touch her, and you leave here with broken bones." Hugh redirected his fury toward Phoebe. "You're coming home. Now, no." Phoebe stepped forward, each step deliberate. "You dressed me up and showed me off and treated me like breeding stock. That's not love, father. That's commerce. I gave you everything. Education, clothes. You gave me training in how to be valuable to rich men. And now you're angry. I don't want to use it." Hugh looked between his 2 daughters standing together against him and understood, finally, that his power over them was finished. "You're both dead to me," he said. "No inheritance. No family. Nothing." "Good," Bridget said. "Your name has been a weight around my neck since birth." He rode off in a cloud of dust. Bridget watched him go and felt nothing but relief. Then came the letters. Delphine brought them to Bridget one afternoon, a leather satchel that had belonged to Laurel Sharpe, given to Delphine by a woman named Odette Farrow. Laurel's oldest friend, who'd been holding them for 15 years, waiting for the right person. Inside were letters in Laurel's handwriting documenting everything she'd discovered before she died. Warren had built the Sharpe Ranch through fraud, forged grazing leases, manipulated land claims, pressured families into selling at unfair prices. The Brennan dispute existed because Warren had stolen their grazing rights 2 decades earlier and altered the documents to make his claim look legitimate. Bridget and Colton spent an entire night reading the evidence. By dawn, Colton looked like he'd aged 10 years. "We confront him," Bridget said. "He makes restitution to the families he damaged, or we make this public. It'll destroy the ranch. It'll make the ranch honest. That's different." They showed Warren everything. He denied it, deflected, invoked his dead wife's illness as proof she'd been confused. Colton shut that down hard. "Don't you dare use her sickness to dismiss this. She saw what you were." And it broke her heart. The confrontation lasted hours. Warren raged, bargained, threatened, but in the end, looking at his dead wife's handwriting documenting his crimes, something collapsed inside him. "If I do this," he said quietly, "we lose half our land, but we keep our integrity," Colton said. "Integrity doesn't pay debts." "No," Bridget said. "Integrity doesn't pay debts." "No," Bridget said, "but it builds something that lasts longer than money." Warren returned the grazing rights to Dale Brennan personally, compensated 3 families he'd pressured into unfair sales, made a public statement acknowledging what he'd done. The ranch lost a third of its holdings. 2 investors pulled out. The empire shrank, but it became real. Dale Brennan, receiving back what had been stolen from his family for 20 years, looked at Bridget and said, "Your husband married a hell of a woman." "Don't I know it," Colton said. The wedding was small. Late June, under cottonwood trees in the foothills with the Rockies standing guard to the west. Bridget wore a simple dress altered from one of Laurel's. Dale Brennan came. Warren gave Bridget away, which felt impossible and right. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met," Warren said as they walked toward Colton. "My son is either the luckiest man alive or the most cursed." "Probably both. Laurel would have liked you. Would have fought me to bring someone like you into this family." His eyes were wet. "I'm glad she won." Phoebe threw herself into bookkeeping and discovered she had a mind for numbers that nobody had ever bothered to develop. Within 2 months, she'd reorganized the ranch's entire financial system and identified accounting errors that had been costing them thousands. "Your sister is brilliant with numbers," Warren said grudgingly one evening. "Surprising." "Only if you assume she was just decorative," Bridget said. Autumn came to the foothills in a blaze of gold. The smaller ranch found its rhythm. Honest boundaries, fairly shared water, sustainable herds. Warren never fully lost his edge, but he learned to channel it differently, building partnerships instead of crushing competition. Bridget gave birth the following January, a daughter. They named her Laurel. Warren held his granddaughter with shaking hands and said, "She would have loved this." "Then live like she's watching," Bridget said. "That's how we honor her." 2 years later, Phoebe married a quiet surveyor named Bennett, who loved numbers nearly as much as she did. Maeve Tierney left Hugh and came to live near her daughters. Hugh drank himself into bankruptcy and sold the ranch to a speculator from Ontario. Nobody mourned it. On Laurel's 2nd birthday, Bridget stood on the ridge above the ranch with her daughter on her hip, watching the foothills roll toward mountains that had witnessed fraud, redemption, and everything between. "Tell me the story again," little Laurel would say years later, as children always do, "about how you and Papa met." Bridget would smile. "It started with a sick horse and an impossible choice." And she'd tell it one more time because some stories deserve telling again and again. Stories about women who were invisible finding themselves seen, about empires built on sand crumbling to make room for something solid, about daughters who refused to be currency and carved out their own worth. Stories about choosing the terrifying unknown over the familiar cage. About love that starts with respect and builds toward something unbreakable. About legacy that matters more than land. The sun set over the Alberta foothills, painting the Rockies in shades of rose and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always new challenges. But tonight Bridget stood with her family on land they'd fought to make honest and felt the deep, quiet satisfaction of having built something true. Not because it was perfect, because it was real. And real, Bridget had learned, was the only foundation strong enough to hold the weight of an honest life.